Thank you. I'd like you to imagine this. I'm 9 years old and I'm shopping with my mother. How boring. And we're in the basement of the department store and she says, "Jane, it's time to go home now." And she heads to the going up escalator and she stands at the bottom of the escalator waiting for me. And I look at the going up escalator and I look at the coming down escalator and I think, yes, I'm going for it. Have you ever done this? So I get to the escalator and I run as fast as I can to try and beat my mother to the top. Has anybody ever done that? It's really great fun, isn't it? I can see a few faces smiling there, and you've obviously wished you had if you haven't actually done it. One of two things is going to happen. You either get to the top, but you're absolutely exhausted, or you don't make it to the top, and you get carried back down into the basement again. I made it to the top, but that's because I was 9 years old and fit. I wouldn't try it now. But the other thing that happens to me that day is my mother's cross now. How do I know she's cross? Because she's not speaking to me anymore. She's gone silent and tight-lipped. Ever had that? Ever had anybody go silent and tight-lipped on you? It doesn't just last for 5 minutes or a few minutes, it lasts for 2 days. But you see, I think we were brought up in a time, in an era, in a culture where it's not okay to talk. It's not okay to talk about things that we're uncomfortable about or that we're unhappy about. Does anybody agree with that? And so we've learnt that it's not okay to talk, and we've not learnt the skills sometimes to talk. I mean, yes, we all talk all day, but we don't sometimes talk about the things that really concern us. So I have a mantra in my business that whatever is unspoken is hardest to change. So why did I tell you that story? Because in the very, very short time I've got with you today, I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about why does conflict actually escalate to the point where we're unable to deal with it anymore? Why do we have some of these behaviors that cause us distress? And actually, why do I believe that conflict is the magic ingredient, maybe in your business as practice managers and generally? And I wrote a book, in fact, Ahmed's going to tell you the title of it later, but when I wrote my book, the reason I did that is because I know that if you have a conflict in your work life, it's going to impact on you at home, am I right? And if you have a conflict at home, you're going to take it into work with you. And these 2 things have actually fueled my work. And I see the fallout of that, and that's why I'm so passionate about what I do and the skills that I help people with. So I've had the pleasure of speaking to some of you as practice managers. In fact, my daughter's a GP, and many of our family work in the medical practice. So I know, and as Ahmed said earlier, Dr. Ahmed, you have a lonely job and a difficult job because you wear 2 hats. On the one hand, you're managing a multi-thousand, multi-million-pound business sometimes, and on the other hand, you're a go-to person. So you might be, with your multi-million-pound hat on, responding to 400 emails today. You might be looking at a new lease for your building. You might be setting up a partners meeting. You might be, what are the other things? Dealing with a capita payment that hasn't come in, recruiting a new receptionist. You might be drafting a complaints letter. Does any of that sound familiar? But on the other hand, you might also be changing a light bulb. You might be emptying the drains. You might be dealing with a patient who got stuck in the lift. There might be a patient in reception who said they've just read an article by Dr. Hilary Jones and here they are. You might be dealing with your staff who've just read another tweet by Jeremy Hunt about 7-day working. You might be lying awake at night worrying how you're going to deal with all this, and then you might be changing a light bulb. Does that sound familiar? So what happens then? What is this process called escalation? Why does conflict escalate? Why do you end up in the basement of the department store? Well, there's a gentleman, an Austrian gentleman called Friedrich Glasel. He wrote the book, he wrote it in Austrian, but somehow I've managed to find a translation of it. But he described a process which has really helped me a lot in my work, which is this escalation process, and it has several steps to it. And what you need to understand is it's a process. I was mediating a dispute yesterday between two executives, and I'm saying to them, you're stuck on this escalator, you're in a process that is going to happen to you unless you have the skills or someone has the skills to press the red button at the bottom and stop your conflict escalating so you can actually climb back up that escalator unless you're 9 years old and fit. So here's what happens, and see if you recognize any of these stages in anything that's happened to you in general practice or in life. First of all, you stop talking, okay? And when you stop talking, you turn your back on someone else. I'm not talking to you anymore. So you go silent, like my mother did. And many of us do that. That's an instinctive reaction. The second thing we do is, having gone silent, we then find someone else to support our story. So we form groups. Both parties to the dispute form their own support group. And we have what I call parallel conversations. So you run your story over in your head, and you have the story that you tell your friends, and the other person has the same story. Are those two stories the same? Almost never. In every legal case that I mediate, you have a whole team that has this story and a whole team that has that story. And very often they end up in the High Court arguing those two. So you have parallel conversations. The next thing that you do in your teams, in your groups, is you gossip and moan. So you embroider the story. But what happens on the outside is you wear a mask. So very often, and I've learnt this from all sorts of people I'm talking to, when somebody says to you, "What's up?" you say nothing. Somebody says, "Is everything okay?" you say, "Yes, fine." You're still not able to have that conversation face to face to say what's really going on. The next thing that happens, if you don't manage to stop the escalator, is that people start firing insults and threats. Now, if there's a legal case, those could be emails, but it all starts to get nasty. And what's interesting, what happens next, at the next stage, is that it becomes not about the issue anymore. People forget what the issue was. Now, it's I don't want to lose face. If I back down now, I'm going to look silly. If I back down now, I'll let my friends down. So you stick with the issue, and you stick with your point of view, and you don't back down. Does that sound familiar? Now, the very final stage, and I won't get too close to the edge, but it's called into the abyss together. Because neither party's backing down, and they both say, I won't back down unless you back down. And in fact, I don't care if I go down as long as you go down too. And many disputes that I deal with get to this stage of into the abyss together. So unless someone's pressing that red button, that's where you're going. Does that sound familiar? So, what is the cost of conflict? I'm very interested in this. What happens? What is the cost to you? What is the cost to your business if you don't have the skills to stop this escalation process? So let's take a very simple example, and it's not based on a real case study, although you may have someone in your practice that represents this. But imagine you have a receptionist called Maeve. Perhaps she's been in your business for a long time, in your practice for a long time. Perhaps she's been there since before any of the partners were there. Perhaps she's almost about to retire. But she's a dragon of a receptionist, and she's upsetting the other staff, and she's upsetting a lot of patients, and you've had a number of complaints. And what would be great if somebody could challenge her? But actually, it's really too dangerous to mention. It's really too dangerous to raise the issue. But in fact, what's now happening is a couple of other members of staff are saying, if she's not going, I'm going. So the cost of conflict becomes also something that escalates. The number of people that get impacted. And it's not about necessarily the financial cost, although there may be financial costs here involved. But what are the costs to you in lost productivity, lost hours, lost energy, the impact on people's health, and the impact on relationships. And when we are unable to deal with some of these conflicts, those are the costs that we have to deal. But you see, why do I say conflict is a magic ingredient? So I'd like you to imagine this. Conflict is a process, and it's the process by which a person expresses their unhappiness with another person. So going silent is one of the things you do, but there are other ways in which we express our unhappiness. Could be shouting at someone else, could be throwing something at them, whatever it is. It's a process, and it starts at one end at the moment someone expresses their unhappiness, so whatever the catalyst for that was, and it ends at the point, which I call dispute, which is the product of an unresolved dispute. It now cannot be resolved except by someone else or by something drastic. So actually, from the time this issue arose to the moment over here where it becomes a dispute, you have what I call a window of opportunity. It might be small or it might be long. Some disputes I deal with go on for years and years, but you have a window of opportunity during which, if you have the skills, you could de-escalate this dispute. Now, conflict is a magic ingredient because I like to think of it like water. Now, I don't know if, like you, I was in London yesterday and I was in a hotel room and there was an absolute deluge outside my room. But the thing in the UK and in most places is, you know, we have things that capture water, because what would happen to your garden? The place I was staying had an absolutely beautiful garden. But if you didn't water your garden, what would happen to it? It would shrivel up and die, wouldn't it? So we need water and we need conflict. Conflict actually, if you think of it about someone being unhappy with something, is simply energy which needs to be channeled, and it's energy to say, things aren't quite right as they are, they could be different, they could be better, but we need a way to express that. So rather like water, think of it as something that helps your business to grow, your family to grow, your relationships to grow. You need to capture that element and channel it. And you need to have a way to capture it, a way to say it's okay to talk about these things, and a way to manage it as it escalates. So if a face-to-face confrontation doesn't work, how else could we manage this? What are the other stages? And that needs to be written into your business. So you have these processes, like we have for water, for being able to capture this energy. So there are 3 skills, I mean there's many more, but there are 3 skills I want to talk to you about this afternoon that will help you to transform conflict in your organization and to de-escalate. There's 3 simple things called listen, learn, and love. Simple, but not easy. To listen. Now, most times we misunderstand. To understand another person is actually a miracle, I believe, because we're actually not so good at communicating. We're good at hearing, but we're not good at listening. So, for example, take a couple called Charles and Dorothy. Every day they drive to work in their little red car. And every day as they drive to work, they cross the dual carriageway. Every day as they get to the junction at the dual carriageway, Charles says to Dorothy, "Everything okay, dear?" And Dorothy says, "Yep, fine, dear." And off they go. Today, as they get to the junction, Charles says to Dorothy, "Everything okay, dear?" And Dorothy says, "Yes, fine, dear." And as they pull out, a large truck bears down on them. So later, in the hospital, Charles says to Dorothy, "Every day when we get to that junction, I ask you if everything's okay. Is it okay to pull out?" And you say yes, and I drive on. He said, "Why did you say everything was okay today?" And Dorothy says, "Every day when you say everything okay, dear, I assumed you were asking me how I was today." Does that sound familiar? So when we listen, there are 3 skills I'm going to give you. It's a topic that I talk on and I run whole workshops on. But listening requires 3 specific skills. First of all, you need to pay attention to the other person. Not always easy. Sometimes we're on our phones these days. Sometimes we've got lots of things as you're multitasking. There's lots of things going on in our mind. But if you really listen, you need to pay attention to someone else. The second thing you need to do is you need in some way to reflect back to the other person what you heard, so that they can hear that you heard what was important to you. And the third thing you need to do is to check, simply to check in. Did I get it right? Was my understanding what you were trying to tell me? So pay attention, reflect, and check. 3 simple things, but we don't often either find the time or make the time to do them. The third thing is to learn. A second thing is to learn. So often we make assumptions. We make assumptions about what another person wants or where they're coming from, instead of coming from a place of curiosity. In other words, and particularly also if we believe we're right, our intention in the conversation is much more to prove that we're right or to tell the other person what's important to us than to listen what's important to them. If we come from a place of curiosity, I really wonder why they think what they think. I really wonder what's going on here. Then we can learn. So again, 3 simple things with learning. You need to suspend judgment. So don't judge the other person and don't make assumptions. And then you really need to be open to hearing what the other person is trying to tell you. And I call this being tentative. It's called the power of 10, if you like, because you might say things like, I might be wrong, or I wonder if, but sometimes that very tentative language can help us to draw out of someone else what they might be saying, rather than, you must be wrong and I must be right. So tentative language, the power of 10. So suspend judgment, stop making assumptions, and be tentative. The third skill is love. What do I mean by that? Do I mean romantic love? Do I mean you have to love your partners? Do I mean you have to love your patients? No, love is an action, and love is something you do which honors and respects other people. And again, sometimes when we're angry and not happy, we don't actually show that respect. But I believe that every human being has antennae, and in every interaction we have with other people and every conversation we have, we're going, do I matter and am I heard? Do I matter and am I heard? That's our test for trust and respect. So when you have an angry patient, when you have someone stuck in your lift, when you have a difficult partner, when you have an awkward receptionist, sometimes that's what they're saying. Do I matter and am I heard? And actually, the more someone feels unheard, the more they're going to shout, the more they're just going to go round and round in a circle. So that's why these skills are so important, because actually listening, learning, and loving make the difference. So whatever is unspoken is hardest to change, don't forget. So I believe that we have a real opportunity now. I think we were taught not to talk, and we were certainly not taught to listen. So there is a real opportunity now for us to actually start a movement, to bring these skills into the workplace, to transform the way we communicate with each other in our home lives and in our businesses. And I'd like to encourage you to join me on that journey, because if you could pass this on, if you could pass this message on to one other person and they could pass it on to one other person, just think of how we could transform the way every day that we communicate with each other. So your mission, your job today, should you choose to accept it, is to leave here and to go away and to listen and to learn and to love. Because I believe that conflict is the magic ingredient in our business and our lives. And I believe that collaboration is something that we should find joy in. Thank you very much.